Ferrari is under fire, and what triggered it isn't illegal. It's something far more dangerous, a technical gray area that slipped through the rulebook. Why would the FIA suddenly investigate a system that had already passed early validation, and what exactly did Ferrari build that has the paddock whispering? You're about to discover the secrets behind Ferrari's 2026 power unit, including a stealth air intake, an abandoned steel combustion head, and a battery integration method that could shatter the hybrid balance of Formula One. And here's the twist. The FIA's investigation didn't start in Paris. It started with a simulator crash in Maranello. Ferrari's 2026 power unit, codenamed Project 678, was supposed to be a clean break from the past, a showcase of hybrid efficiency, aggressive thermal management, and chassis-integrated battery design. But behind the scenes, the FIA has launched a targeted investigation into one specific subsystem, a cooling intake hybrid pathway that doesn't appear to break any rules, but might redefine the meaning of intent. The controversy stems from how Ferrari integrated a dual-purpose airflow system, part traditional intake, part internal cooling bypass, that subtly influences energy recovery behavior under partial throttle. It's not banned, but it's also not explicitly legal. And in the world of F1, that's all it takes for a regulatory storm to break out. At the heart of the FIA's concern is a component buried deep in the monocoque and air channel that functions not just as passive cooling, but also modulates temperature around the structural battery casing. This, combined with a novel use of the SiC inverter architecture, appears to give Ferrari enhanced control over battery temperature delta, especially during off-throttle recovery. The implication: while other teams bleed thermal energy through standard dissipation, Ferrari may be recapturing and redirecting it in microcycles to stabilize battery output. Again, not illegal, but it gives them a potential energy deployment consistency that borders on active battery conditioning, something the FIA hadn't formally regulated under current gray area clauses. The leak that triggered this scrutiny didn't come from a rival team, it came from Ferrari's own supplier network. According to internal documents, one of the test rigs used during Phase 2 validation registered anomalous energy retention figures over a 10-lap simulation. These figures weren't consistent with standard hybrid degradation curves. When the FIA's technical observers reviewed the data, they flagged an unusually low drop-off rate in battery efficiency, particularly under ambient stress testing. This anomaly aligned with a structural intake that appeared to manage heat more like a kinetic recovery pathway than a passive vent. In plain terms, Ferrari had found a way to make airflow act like a hidden energy system. Ferrari's response was swift, but calculated. Rather than deny the mechanism's existence, they submitted a revised technical explanation that framed the component as part of their battery safety and cooling compliance. It was a legal move buying time while pushing the burden of proof back on the FIA. But within Maranello, this triggered a quiet internal audit. Vasseur ordered a full breakdown of every gray area clause potentially affected by their hybrid integration system. Engineers were instructed to flag any subsystem whose performance depended on indirect cooling logic or closed-loop thermal adaptation. What emerged was a picture of a power unit built not just for performance, but to dance along the edges of regulation. This brings us to the steel combustion head controversy. Early prototypes of Ferrari's 2026 engine briefly explored a high-strength steel blend to offset vibration issues under hybrid load. The material offered incredible thermal stability, but was flagged for creating microfractures at specific frequencies. Though ultimately abandoned, traces of the steel head logic remain in Ferrari's energy transfer modeling. The FIA now wants to know whether those parameters, even without the original material, still influence how energy is distributed across the hybrid path. This is no longer just about parts, it's about intent. Did Ferrari design their system for legal compliance, or did they build it around a loophole and walk it back later? Rival teams, especially Red Bull and Mercedes, are watching closely. Christian Horner has already hinted that if the FIA clears Ferrari, other teams will be forced to rethink their battery cooling integration before the first homologation deadline. Mercedes, on the other hand, is reportedly furious not because they believe Ferrari cheated, but because the FIA didn't catch it sooner. According to team insiders, if the same system had been discovered mid-season, it would have triggered immediate disqualification under sporting precedent. The fact that Ferrari is being investigated pre-season suggests they may get away with a system that others will be too late to replicate. And here's where things get explosive. If the FIA rules the gray area system is legal, Ferrari enters 2026 with a structural energy advantage that could be worth 0.3 seconds per lap in race trim without touching combustion, fuel flow, or ERS mapping. If the FIA rules it illegal, Ferrari faces a crash redesign of core engine components with less than 3 months before homologation freeze. This is maximum tension at its purest form because the decision doesn't just affect legality. It could shape the outcome of an entire era of F1 power unit development. The political tension inside the FIA is almost as intense as what's happening on the grid. Behind closed doors, technical delegates are split. One faction believes Ferrari exploited a blind spot in the regulations and should be punished retroactively to close the loophole before it becomes widespread. Another insists Ferrari operated within the limits of the wording, and if the rules failed to anticipate this level of innovation, that's not grounds for retroactive enforcement. This internal division has stalled a definitive ruling, leaving Ferrari in a state of limbo. The pressure isn't just regulatory, it's reputational. If the FIA drags its feet too long, it risks being seen as incapable of governing its own hybrid framework, opening itself up to accusations of favoritism or regulatory incompetence. Inside Maranello, the mood is just as complex. Vasseur is facing mounting pressure not only from engineers, but from Ferrari's board. The decision to build the power unit around such a risky interpretation of the rules wasn't made lightly, but it was made strategically. Ferrari believes the 2026 regulations will reward systems that prioritize hybrid stability over peak output, and their design reflects that philosophy. But by anchoring their engine concept to a gray zone, they've now placed their fate in the hands of FIA politics. If the ruling swings against them, the consequences could go beyond just a design revision. It could fracture trust between Vasseur and the upper levels of Ferrari's executive leadership. One of the key figures in this internal dynamic is the head of Ferrari's Energy Systems Group, who allegedly pushed for the controversial integration despite warnings that had bordered on non-compliance. According to leaked internal documents, he believed the FIA would never risk undermining Ferrari before the start of a new engine era. It would be too politically damaging. That assumption is now being tested. If the FIA chooses to make Ferrari an example, this engineer's career could hang in the balance. And if the system is approved, it validates his risk and elevates him to the center of Ferrari's next-gen power unit success. It's a career-defining standoff built on speculative innovation. From a strategic standpoint, Ferrari's position is not entirely defensive. They've already begun working with select FIA advisors to propose a mid-season clarification framework that would allow their system to remain operational in 2026 while closing the door on future replications in 2027. This would create a regulatory grandfather clause essentially protecting their advantage while appearing cooperative. But this proposal comes with a trade-off. Ferrari must disclose the full extent of their system to the FIA, something they've resisted to protect intellectual property. It's a chess match one where every move is being watched by the paddock, the media, and every rival team with a 2026 engine still in development. And this is where things become a matter of psychological warfare. Red Bull and Mercedes have already begun leaking concerns to friendly journalists, subtly framing Ferrari's system as a breach of trust rather than a technical innovation. The goal is clear: apply public pressure on the FIA to rule harshly. Meanwhile, Ferrari is countering with a charm offensive highlighting their commitment to hybrid sustainability and long-term technical excellence. Both sides are playing to the court of public opinion, knowing that in Formula One, perception often shapes reality. And in this case, that reality could influence how the FIA writes and enforces its own rulebook. Beyond the factories and boardrooms, the drivers themselves are preparing for the consequences. Charles Leclerc has been briefed on multiple hybrid scenarios, each with different throttle response profiles depending on how the investigation plays out. His job is to adapt in real time, but the uncertainty is creating tension within the sim program. If Ferrari has to alter their power unit after Leclerc has spent months mastering its behavior, it could affect not just performance, but his confidence. Carlos Sainz, though expected to leave after 2024, has also expressed concern. He's invested in the project, and a last-minute redesign could tarnish what might be his final chapter in red. And finally, we arrive at the bigger question. If Ferrari's gray area innovation is ruled legal, does this open the door for every other team to start gaming the system under the guise of thermal management? And if it's banned, does this signal the end of innovation in favor of rigid conformity? Either way, the FIA must choose a side not just on legality, but on philosophy. Should Formula One reward creative interpretation or punish it to preserve equality? And for you watching, what would you do in the FIA's place?